October 16, 1946. 1:11 a.m. The air inside the small, repurposed gymnasium of the Nuremberg Palace of Justice is so cold you can see the breath of the witnesses, but it is the silence that is truly suffocating. For 11 months, the world has watched the greatest legal drama in human history unfold in the courtroom nearby. But tonight, the law has moved from the bench to the rope. 3 tall, dark wooden gallows, painted a somber charcoal gray, dominate the space where Allied soldiers used to play basketball just weeks ago. The lighting is harsh, provided by temporary floodlights that cast long, skeletal shadows against the brick walls. There are no cameras allowed, no recording devices, and no cinematic flourishes. Just the cold, mechanical reality of state-sanctioned death. The Allied High Command is obsessed with making this look like a professional, clinical conclusion to the madness of the Third Reich. They want the world to know that democracy is more civilized than the monsters it is about to destroy. To ensure this happens, they have searched their ranks for a master of the craft, and they found him in Master Sergeant John C. Woods. Woods is a 43-year-old soldier with a rugged, indifferent face and a resume that reads like a professional judge's dream. He has told the United States Army that he has 15 years of experience as a high-level executioner in the Texas and Kansas prison systems, that he has personally overseen the hanging of 307 men, and that he is the foremost expert on the physics of the long-drop noose. He stands at the top of the 13 steps, checking the hemp rope with a detached, chilling calmness, his leather gloves squeaking as he tightens the knot. He is the ultimate face of American justice, the man who will close the book on Hitler's inner circle. But as he waits for the first prisoner to be brought in, a dark truth is hidden beneath his polished brass buttons. John C. Woods is not a professional executioner. He is not a master of the rope. He is a grifter, a liar, and a man diagnosed with a psychopathic personality who has used the chaos of a global war to fake his way into the most important job in history. This is the declassified truth of the Nuremberg Hangman, a story the United States Army tried to bury for 70 years. It is a story of how a man who couldn't hold a job as a civilian became the arbiter of human history by lying through his teeth, and how he turned the executions of the century into a horrific 20-minute ritual of slow strangulation and bloody incompetence. To understand how the U.S. Army hired a fraud for the biggest mission of 1946, you have to understand the desperation of the post-war cleanup. By late 1945, the war was over, but the vengeance was just beginning. The discovery of the death camps had turned the stomach of the world, and the Allied command was under immense pressure to deliver justice that felt as heavy as the crimes committed. The sentence handed down at Nuremberg was clear: death by hanging. But the Allies had a major problem. They didn't have a hangman. Hanging is an incredibly difficult science. You have to calculate the weight of the prisoner against the length of the drop. If the drop is too long, the velocity of the fall will rip the prisoner's head clean off their shoulders, creating a gruesome spectacle that looks like a war crime. If the drop is too short, the prisoner's neck won't snap, and they will spend upwards of 30 minutes fighting for air, their heart pounding until it eventually explodes from the strain of strangulation. The U.S. Army needed someone who knew the official table of drops, someone who could handle the high-pressure environment of hanging a field marshal or a foreign minister without blinking. They put out an urgent call for an executioner within the engineering and military police units. John C. Woods, a lowly private who had spent the war doing manual labor, saw the notice and realized his destiny. He stepped forward and told the lie that would change his life. He claimed he had been the primary executioner for several high-security prisons in the American South. He claimed he was an expert in knots and traps. The Army, blinded by the logistical nightmare of the upcoming trials and failing to do even a basic background check on a soldier in a combat zone, promoted him to Master Sergeant and gave him the rope. If they had checked, they would have found a service record that was a litany of failures. In 1930, Woods had joined the Navy and deserted within months. When he was caught, a military psychiatrist described him as having a total lack of empathy and a chronic inability to follow the rules of society. He was kicked out with a dishonorable discharge and spent the Great Depression drifting through Kansas, a man with no trade and a dark obsession with violence. When he was drafted again in 1943, he was seen as a problematic soldier who couldn't be trusted with complex tasks. But now, in 1946, the Army needed a killer, and they didn't care if he was a psychopath, as long as he could tie a knot. By the time the night of October 16th arrived, Woods had already practiced on dozens of low-level war criminals. He had become a celebrity among the guards, a man who bragged about his kills and pocketed the personal effects of the men he hung. But the leaders of the Third Reich were different. This was the main stage. The first man to walk through the heavy doors into the gymnasium was Joachim von Ribbentrop. He had been the foreign minister of Nazi Germany, the man who had shaken hands with Stalin to start the war. He walked with a stiff, arrogant gait, his head held high even as he reached the gallows. Woods was waiting for him at the top. He didn't look at Ribbentrop as a man. He looked at him as a trophy. He placed the black hood over Ribbentrop's head, tightened the noose, and adjusted the knot under the left ear. He pulled the lever. The trapdoor snapped open, but instead of the clean, sharp crack of a breaking neck, there was only the sound of the rope stretching. Ribbentrop didn't drop through the center of the hole. Woods had miscalculated the physics or placed the prisoner incorrectly. Ribbentrop's body swung wildly, slamming against the sides of the wooden shaft. He didn't die. For 15 minutes, the witnesses stood in the freezing gym and watched as Ribbentrop's legs kicked and his body heaved, fighting the rope. He was slowly, agonizingly strangling. Woods stood above the hole, looking down with a detached, cold expression, seemingly unbothered that he had just botched the execution of the foreign minister. The next man was Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel. He was the ultimate Prussian officer, a man who lived and breathed military discipline. He wanted to die with the dignity of a soldier. He marched to the gallows in his full uniform, expecting a professional end. Woods, perhaps fueled by a dark sense of vengeance or pure incompetence, ensured that Keitel's end was anything but dignified. He had constructed the trap-door hole too narrow for a man of Keitel's frame. When the lever was pulled, Keitel dropped, but his face smashed into the edge of the wooden trap-door on the way down. The impact tore his face apart, leaving him bleeding profusely as he began to struggle on the rope. He hung there, his face a mask of blood, strangling for 24 minutes. The witnesses were horrified. This wasn't justice, it was a slaughterhouse. But Woods didn't stop. He moved on to the next man, and the next, each one subjected to what would later be called the Woods treatment. Julius Streicher, the man whose anti-Semitic propaganda had fueled the Holocaust, had to be dragged to the gallows. He spat at Woods and screamed, "Heil Hitler!" When he dropped, the rope began to vibrate and swing with such violence that Woods had to go down into the dark area beneath the gallows. He grabbed Streicher's legs and pulled down with his full body weight to finally snap the man's neck. It was a scene of primal savagery that occurred in the name of the Allied law. The official story released to the newspapers the next morning was a complete fabrication. The army told the world that the executions were perfectly handled, that the men died quickly, and that the justice of Nuremberg was untainted. They didn't mention the 20-minute strangulations or the smashed faces. They didn't mention that their master hangman was a fraud who had failed the basic mechanics of his job. They let John C. Woods become a hero. He was featured in magazines, heralded as the man who ended the Nazis. He returned to the United States and was treated like a star in Wichita, Kansas. He posed for photos with his ropes, smiling and bragging about how he had given it to the Krauts. But the truth has a way of rising from the ashes. In the years following the executions, medical experts and historians began to analyze the few leaked photos of the bodies. They noticed the blood on the faces, the position of the knots, and the evidence of slow death. They began to dig into Woods' past, contacting the prisons in Texas and Kansas. The response was unanimous. "We have never heard of this man." John C. Woods had lied his way into history. He had used the rope to escape his own insignificance, turning a historic legal conclusion into a personal outlet for his own psychopathy. But his luck didn't last forever. Woods eventually re-enlisted and was sent to the Pacific, stationed at Eniwetok Atoll. In 1950, while attempting to repair an electrical line, a task he claimed to be an expert in, he made one last fatal mistake. He stepped onto a live wire. 2,000 volts of electricity surged through his body, charring his skin and stopping his heart instantly. He died by the same violent force he had spent his life worshipping. The Nuremberg Hangman was gone, leaving behind a legacy of botched justice and declassified secrets. The U.S. Army had hired a fraud because they were more interested in the appearance of justice than the reality of it. They wanted a man who would pull the lever without a conscience, and they got exactly what they asked for. The story of John C. Woods is the dark shadow of the Nuremberg Trials, a reminder that even in our finest hours, we are capable of the deepest incompetence and the darkest vengeance. We look at the medals and the trials, and we see the triumph of the law, but the declassified truth shows us the man with the rope, a liar, a fraud, and the man who made the Nazis suffer one last time, not because of the law, but because he didn't know how to tie a knot. This is the truth of the most important execution in history. It is a story of blood, rope, and the lies we tell ourselves to feel civilized. Master Sergeant John C. Woods took his secrets to a grave in Kansas, but the history books will always remember the night in the gymnasium when a fraud held the fate of the world in his hands and botched it on purpose. We must remember John C. Woods not as a hero, but as a warning. He is the proof that in the chaos of war, the most dangerous people aren't always the ones in the enemy uniforms. Sometimes they are the ones we hire to do our dirty work. The Nuremberg Hangman, the American fraud, the man who lied his way into the history books. We have declassified the file, and the truth is finally clear. Justice is blind, but sometimes the people who carry it out are just looking for a reason to kill. This is the final word on the man who hung the Reich, a story of a psychopathic personality who found his perfect moment in the shadow of the gallows. Let us hope we never need another John C. Woods again. The gymnasium is empty, the ropes are gone, but the echo of those 20-minute strangulations will haunt the history of the war forever. It is the sound of vengeance disguised as law, and it is the sound of a lie that lasted a lifetime. John C. Woods, the Nuremberg Hangman, declassified, done, delivered. The gymnasium at Nuremberg has long been replaced by other things, the physical evidence of that night destroyed by time and the army's desire to forget. But the declassified reality remains as a stain on the shiny surface of our victory. We won the war, but we let a fraud handle the conclusion. We let a man with a psychopathic personality execute the most important judgment of the 20th century. Why? Because it was easier than finding the truth. It was easier to believe the lie of the professional hangman than to face the reality of what we were doing. John C. Woods was the hangman we deserved in 1946, a man as broken and violent as the world he was cleaning up. But as we look back now, we have to ask ourselves, was it worth it? Was the vengeance of those slow strangulations worth the integrity of the law? There is no easy answer. There is only the rope, the trapdoor, and the man from Kansas who lied to everyone. John C. Woods, the Nuremberg Hangman. May his story be a reminder that the truth always comes out, no matter how deep the drop. The briefing is concluded. The secrets of the gallows are revealed. Success is the only option, and the truth is the only legacy. This is WW2 Declassified, moving to next mission. Over and out. The shadows of the Nuremberg Gymnasium have finally been illuminated by the light of the truth. We see the man, the rope, and the lies. We see the fraud who became a hero, and we see the dark heart of a war that changed everything. John C. Woods was a symptom of a world in pain, a man who found his only talent in the machinery of death. Let us remember him for what he was, A warning. A warning about the cost of vengeance and the danger of the professional killer. The Nuremberg Hangman, John C. Woods, declassified and delivered. The truth is out. Now go make history, but tell it the right way, because the archives are watching and the rope is always waiting. This is the final word. The file is closed. Signal lost. Mission accomplished. The gymnasium is quiet. The ropes are gone. But the name John C. Woods will live on in the shadows of the Great War. The man who lied his way into the ultimate judgment. The man who botched the end of the Third Reich. The man who died by the very power he worshipped. This is the declassified reality. This is the truth of the Nuremberg Hangman. We will not forget. We will not look away. We will continue to uncover the secrets of the past, because that's what we do. We are the keepers of the history, the tellers of the truth, and the voices of the declassified. WW2 Declassified.